Hey, it's a Saturday afternoon. We ain't got nothing else to do, so let's pop into Indianapolis, where aside from making things weird for Caitlin Clark, uh, they're getting ready for a draft. They have a first round draft pick. 15th overall, without a whole bunch of driving needs, but some luxury purchases that they could make. Chris Ballard has a history of trading back, not trading up and aggressively. So any fantasies of them going up to get Marvin Harrison Jr. or something to continuing on his father's legacy, probably not going to happen. But I like Chris Ballard a lot. GM, originally from Texas City, on loan to the state of Indiana. But he does a really good job. Other than finding a quarterback for year after year after year, they just kept rolling through these aging, like withering old men, or like tried to make the best of a Carson Wentz. And obviously last year they drafted Anthony Richardson, who might be the truth, or he might end up having like the fourth shoulder injury of his year next of his life next year. So we'll see. But as we know, very, very good matchup between the Colts and the Texans the first time around this season, and then a critical play-in game at the end of the season. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of Colts fans here via the algorithm. Let's try to keep it somewhat civil in the comments. I would say gentle to mild trolling on both sides, if possible. Like usually I'm the worst offender if I'm drinking. I'm only drinking lightly today. So anything along the lines of maybe like the little Greg Doyle thing I just did or something, that's all fair. Just keep it clean. Other than that, here's Chris Ballard with his opening comments ahead of the 2014 draft. For those of you new to the channel, I'm Seth Payne. Played in the NFL for 10 years, long time ago. Played 5 years for the Texans, 5 years for the Jaguars. I do sports radio in Houston now. So like, subscribe, hate me. What if you hate me, just don't. You don't have to give a thumbs down. You just leave and we'll be on our way. We never have to talk about it again. It'll be like a summer romance.
Exciting time of year, not just for. I mean, look, it's always great when the players come back. There's always some more juice and energy in the building. It's always great to get them back, and their attitude and excitement to get better. You know, with Rusty retiring, we hired Mike Menace from the Eagles, who, we had a pretty long search to replace Rusty because Rusty was so good, and we found a guy that I think really can help make a big difference in the team, and he's been outstanding. I know the players have been really receptive and to what he's doing, and also exciting in the city. I mean,
okay, that's Rusty Jones. He's a longtime strength coach for them. Rusty Jones, pioneer in the strength and conditioning field. So he retired. They hired somebody new. There you go.
I want to wish the Pacers all the best of luck. Kevin, Chad,
go Roy Hibbert,
and Rick. They're all great people, and I think they've just done a tremendous job building, that organization and that team up to be a playoff contender. And I wish them all the best versus Milwaukee here starting out. And then, of course, the Fever getting Caitlin Clark. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun to watch her play in our city, and she's a tremendous player. All right, fire away.
Chris Murray said back in at the end of the season, like the rookie quarterback contract gives you some flexibility, avenues to do things differently. Does it do anything for you draft-wise?
I don't know draft-wise particularly. I mean, look, when you got a young quarterback, I've always thought, you got to protect him. All right, that's one, which I think we did a pretty good job last year, and I think we'll continue to do well. Tony's done a really good job with that group. We got a pretty talented group of O-linemen. You want to
that is one thing too. The 2 years ago when the Colts were struggling in the first half of the season, I think some of the O-line issues were overblown. They got it back together and figured some things out. And then I think Shane Steichen himself helps out with the protection just by virtue of the RPOs and a lot of things that he does to take some of the heat off the quarterback. Like the actual design of the offense is, I don't want to say it's an easy one for offensive linemen, but their use of the play action helps them a good amount.
Continue to add, playmakers around him. Being able to sign Pitt back, having, Jonathan now fully healthy coming into the offseason. He looks really good. I expect him to have a really big year. Putting more players around him is what you always want to do. Watching Downs take another step, have Pierce take another step. Those are going to be, important for us to have success.
Okay, so Jonathan Taylor, who, again, if you're joining this now and you're a Colts fan, this is a Texan-centric podcast, so we're looking at it through that lens. But I would say, for one, obviously, Jonathan Taylor had his 2 best games of the year versus the Texans. So injury history or what have you or anything else, he is a huge concern, obviously. As far as the wide receivers go, Downs in the slot, Pittman getting his extension. I think those guys are just fine. Like Pittman's not a classic guy you would look at as the number one guy, but he's their number one paid guy. And Alec Pearson is deep threat. Like it creates enough of a threat, and they're dangerous enough. And obviously, if Anthony Richardson legs are back there, that adds a whole new dynamic to it. But I would say, like for me, looking at it as an opponent of the Colts, if they draft a receiver in the first round, I'm not going to be super enthused about that. I think they can still they can try to fill out that receiving room. I'd say cornerback, safety, and wide receiver would be the ones that, and safety's not going to go in the first round. Cornerback and wide receiver, I'm guessing, will be one of their first picks. That's not like a huge revelation.
Yards after the catch as something to add to the offense at other points this offseason. Is that just, when you guys look at the offense and everything?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, y'all.
So he said, basically, are you looking at yards after catch as a big key?
Always want a guy that can catch a hitch and go, or catch a shallow and be able to make somebody miss. And then I think also, like a lot of the yards after catch, not only from a make a miss run, but also from scramble plays. I mean, that's where a lot of them come from. Guys, all of a sudden the quarterback starts to move around. Guys break free and they're in space. Now it's harder to cover. The longer you got to cover, when you got guys that can run, it allows them to free up. I thought you even saw it some with Gardner this year. Times where he would start running around, we'd hit a shot, after the catch, just because of his ability to run around. But look, you're always looking for guys that are dangerous with the ball in their hands.
Chris, how do you?
Yeah, and I think with the Texans defense, one of the biggest concerns was, hey, you're a team that plays zone a boatload, and yet you're getting crushed on some of these deep shots. Like those two things aren't supposed to happen. And sometimes it's when plays extend and discipline breaks down. A lot of the stuff last year was as much mental as it was physical. And even though there's a huge question mark for the Texans at that cornerback spot opposite Derek Stingley, there's a lot of it that just needs to get cleaned up with guys playing their responsibilities. Some of that, too, is the linebackers playing better. It was made that much more difficult on the defensive backs because the linebackers weren't always in sync or on the right page. So sloppiness there. And when I hear Chris Ballard talk about run after the catch with Colts wide receivers, yeah, Anthony Richardson's ability to extend the play is death if you're not disciplined on the back end of the defense.
Look at players, offense or defense, playing like being an elite maybe at one thing or being good at multiple different things. Like how much do you weigh that throughout the draft? Like elite talent in one area versus they can do multiple different things at a high level.
That's a good question because look, there's no perfect player. They all got a hole, every one of them. Somewhere there's no perfect ready-made player. They all have strengths and they all have weaknesses. So what you want to do is, okay, this is what he does really well. Let's put him in that role to do that specific thing really well. And I think in the draft, that's one thing you're looking at. And that's one thing we're meeting with our coaches today and tomorrow. And we just had a long discussion about a couple guys. I'm not going to tell you what side of the ball, but what's the vision for the player? Like it's easy for scouts and us to have a vision.
It's like, okay, yeah, obviously you're not going to tell us which side of the ball, but like you're not clever. You don't have to let us know that, like, hey, by the way, I'm not telling anyway.
But
I like Chris Ballard.
Coaches got to have the same vision, and we've got to be able to see the thing of how we're going to end up developing and what role this guy's going to play. And then if he does have some deficiencies, okay, what are the things he does really well and how we're going to use him to allow him to do those things really well?
It's one thing when it comes to rookies, like Bill O'Brien, it used to be really frustrating that he was a guy that didn't seem to trust rookies, didn't want to play him until they really, really proved it. I feel much more in line with Chris Ballard is that, especially in the modern NFL, you got to get these guys out there on the field and do whatever they can do effectively, very quickly. But also, I think this is where sometimes the teams that really do a good job of coaching in season, coaching skill and technique in season, have a huge advantage over some teams in the NFL, and some coaches are very much all about the X's and O's, and they spend so much time game planning and scheming and everything, but their players never actually get better through the course of the season, especially young guys. So I feel good about that with D'Amico. I think D'Amico's got a very skills-based point of view, obviously, and he's done a very good job with that.
Very open-ended question, but what's the biggest pitfall do you think, whether individually or as teams, that you got to avoid in the draft?
So biggest pitfalls you got to avoid in the draft.
That's a good question. That's a deep one. we could probably spend some time on that one. Character is always who they are is important. Okay. And look, we're dealing with young men here that are young men that are not fully developed into men yet. We're talking about 20, 21, 22-year-old young men that make mistakes. Okay. And I can live with some of those mistakes, but to me, the things that when they fail is if they don't love to play the game. I think we've all, and y'all have done this long enough. You've been around players that maybe are not fully mature off the field, but on the field, they love football. So they're going to do everything in their power to get better. So I think and it's the hardest part to figure out. Like, character is the hardest. Time and money. How are they going to handle their time? Because they've got more of it. And how they're going to handle their money. And then the outside influences that are grabbing on them. I think sometimes we forget that these young men have a lot of people that all of a sudden you're playing in the NFL, you're playing professional sports that are coming out of the woodworks to grab at them. So they got to be, and we're asking them to do it at a young age. Now I think we do a really good job. David Thornton is outstanding. David
Thornton, former Colts player, drafted probably around like 2001 or so, but he's their player programs guy. I'm guessing by the way he's talking about this. The time, money, and I think so. Time on their hands, money in their pocket, and he would probably say friends and acquaintances, but you always got to be careful about that. You never really want to come right out and say that a lot of the players' families are jackasses and will pull them down. Certainly their friends are jackasses, but hopefully the guys can grow their way out of the jackass friends. Family you can't do anything about. So that's a dicey one right there. I think the biggest thing that's changing is that you've got guys who've had money now because of NIL. So you got a little taste. You remember with CJ Stroud last year, I think one of the more impressive things about him that I learned in the offseason was just how disciplined they at least presented him to be when it came to handling his NIL money, the way he helped out his offensive lineman with that NIL money, used it to pay for meals for everybody. He kind of focused it towards leadership and limited how many sponsorships or NIL deals he was going to do. So he already demonstrated some discipline with the money side of things. You're going to see some other guys that can't handle it at all. One thing that you also want to hear general managers talk about, this is a tricky one. Guys might have NIL money in college now, but there's nothing that can compare an offensive lineman for getting all kinds of attention from adult women in an NFL city. It's not something most of them are accustomed to. Okay, the big uglies, they've never had like a super hot, sophisticated lady, or at least somebody who presents themselves as sophisticated, put the full court press on them, and sometimes it can be a little overwhelming for them. So that's the fourth thing. David does a tremendous job connecting with not only the player but their family and who's in their circle. So we could go in a million ways there of what you try to avoid. The hardest thing is getting the character right. That's the hardest thing. And there's a lot of times we'll pass on guys in the draft, and I know people freak out. Why? Well, there's usually something we found out or didn't like that, we ended up passing. It wasn't a good fit for us. It might be a good fit for somebody else, and they might make it work, but for us, it wasn't. It's all the, by the way, yeah, and whenever whenever you have a temptation to say like, well, yeah, this guy got in a little trouble, but that's what I was doing when I was 22. Remember, you weren't drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. Also, that was the very argument we were all using for Johnny Manziel, right? And that didn't turn out so hot. Like us, or I shouldn't say us, like I was all right. But a lot of people, like if you're living a life and not worried about being a college athlete when you're in college and everything, yeah, you probably also weren't at the right frame of mind to get drafted number 1 overall and get $40 million guaranteed.
About not giving Gus enough back in January. Really haven't done anything outside the building on defense. Any reason behind that?
Well,
Haven't really done anything or added on defense.
a lot of it is what's available, okay, and circumstances were available. I think getting Dallas Flowers back will help. All right, so
Dallas Flowers was an undrafted rookie free agent who I believe started the Texans game. I want to say he started the first 3 or 4 games of the season.
I
I
think
say Dallas Clark. It's Dallas Flowers, and it's spelled the wrong way. It's not spelled like the proper Dallas. So, but they were apparently pretty high on him before he got injured.
probably when looking back on it, when I made that statement, the injury part of it played into it, and then we gave him a bunch of rookies. Well, now they're no longer rookies anymore. I mean, Jalen Jones is no longer a rookie. Juju is no longer a rookie. Dallas Flowers were hoping to get back healthy. We got back Kenny, back in the mix, which I think everybody in the in the grand scheme of things would tell you he's one of the top nickels in the league. It's not like these guys don't have enough talent. Do we want to add some more? Of course, we always want to add competition. But
So like every mock draft and their brother has the Colts taking a cornerback. So I've got Chris Ballard here in the press conference praising Dallas Flowers up and down, the undrafted rookie out of Pittsburgh State. I'm not buying it.
I think what we did is we gave him a bunch of young players, with not a lot of vet presence back there other than Kenny and probably Julian.
Are you worried you're too young?
No, not anymore. I think they've grown up, and
So he asked, are you worried they're too young?
I think it's been fun to watch them. I mean, look, once you play 16, 17 games in this league, you've grown up to the fact where you're no longer a rookie. So I think we'll see better play out of them. And I didn't think it's kind of like the ass whipping y'all gave the O-line 2 years ago, and y'all just, O-line sucks, it can't play. I kept going, man, the second half of the season, I didn't think it was that bad. I mean, there were some individual moments, of course, but I thought they got better.
I thought they sucked in the first half, and then they got better in the second half. Well, that was the one good thing that happened when Jeff Saturday took over. That I don't know if it was just random chance or luck, or maybe it was never a bad offensive line. But when Jeff Saturday took over, by coincidence or maybe because of his influence, they did end up playing better and more like themselves in the second half of that season. Quentin Nelson was going through. Maybe Quentin Nelson was injured, and it wasn't disclosed. Who knows?
Better as they played. I thought they got better as they played, and I think they'll continue to get better.
Hey, Chris, do you timing is everything, and the timing of this offseason had you spending a lot of your money on keeping guys back, right? Just because of that timing, was it always destined that this draft was going to be maybe more important than others in terms of getting help right now because you can't go out and hire new help right now?
Well,
So remember, DeForest Buckner, new deal. Kenny Moore, the nickelback that they were just talking about, new deal. Paid Jonathan Taylor during the season. So they've spent money and resources mostly on retaining a lot of their own over the past several months.
I think anytime you draft, look, the majority of your best players on your team, you hope they come from the draft. Okay. When you're building through free agency, I think y'all know my philosophy on this. And I think you can look through the league. When you build through, you can't get all your best players through free agency. Too expensive. And it doesn't last over time. I think the draft's always important to get. I think now in today's football, these guys got to come in and play. They do. They got to come in and play. And I think a lot of that, I think a lot of them are more ready to play probably than they were in the past for whatever reason. Like the one thing I'm blown away with talking to some of these really young guys is their football intelligence and knowledge of the game. Like, man, you talk to a kid from, I'm just grabbing a school, but Georgia on defense. Kirby in that group, I mean, they know defensive football. They know it as well as anybody. I mean, they have been schooled at a very high level that translates to this level.
I'd say the other thing too, why guys today might be more prepared. At least some guys are like some. I would say I don't think it's across the board, but there's seemingly more guys who are way more prepared than in the past. One, Madden, just for the basics. Two, in terms of coverages, routes, all that stuff. Two, YouTube. Three, iPads and other technology that coaches are able to use now. I mean, the amount of technology that they can use to really efficiently get a lesson home, especially in college where the time is very it's very regimented, how much time you have to play with the players. It's just so much easier for coaches to put together packages of like, okay, this is how you this is how you react to this coverage. This is how you play this blocking scheme. This is how you do all those things. It's just a lot easier to do and give feedback on the players themselves. And then, of course, 7-on-7 leagues and all that stuff.
So I think,
and I also think some of these kids, for as much crap as Gen Z gets, I think in some ways, the fact that they don't spend as much time just BSing with each other and they're having less sex and like everything, just to generalize all the various trends with Gen Z. I think there's more kids that just spend time nerding out on what they like, whether it's video games or football or whatever else.
I think to answer your question, Greg, I think every draft's important to get guys you got to get 2 or 3 guys. You'd like all of them to hit and help you right away. I know that's not real, but you need to get those guys to be able to play and make an impact.
How much of your thinking along the same lines? You're not drafting for just today. These guys, you need them to produce primarily 3-4 years from now to backfill your team. How much of the philosophy is about today versus tomorrow? And I know coaches got to coach today, so their philosophy is different. You got to think long term.
It's always that. I think that's the general coaching, scouting, tug and pull that you get, where you'll have
Bob Kraft.
We're looking at, okay, 2 years from now, this guy's up. We'll draft this guy to replace him. And then, and then on the coaching end, like, hey, screw that, man. I need today. No, it's definitely a balance.
That's the biggest thing, man. That's why you need a GM, because the GM's got the long-term approach. The coach wants to win now, and you got to balance those two out somehow. Unless your coach is super, super mature and can detach himself from his own opinions and B, like his intense desire to win right now. It's really, really hard to do. That's why you almost got to be a little bit on the spectrum to be able to do that. Like some legendary coaches probably are. But most aren't capable of doing that.
You re-sign, a lot of your re-signs now match up timeline-wise, like 2026, right in that area. Was that specific, anything to do with Anthony's contract, or was that
a little bit, and a little bit just how it kind of worked out, and these guys are not.
I was zoning. I was reading your guys' comments. You're too entertaining.
A lot of your re-signs now match up timeline-wise, like 2026, right in that area. Was that specific, anything to do with Anthony's contract, or was that
a little bit?
Okay. Oh, this is interesting. Okay, this is really interesting. I'm glad I backed up. So a lot of the contracts that they've signed with guys end in 2026. Is that meant to line up with your rookie quarterback's contract and when you might be giving him a new one or something? Because Caserio doesn't like acknowledging that, I guess. It seems like he kind of talked around it in generalities the other day when he brought up, discussions about windows, where it's almost impossible for me not to believe that Caserio is thinking specifically about that rookie quarterback window and spending aggressively within it. But so maybe Chris Ballard is going to be a little bit more open about this.
And a little bit just how it kind of worked out. And these guys they're all kind of in their primes. And so it's a little different when you're signing a 24-year-old, like when we signed Kenny the last time. I think Kenny was 22, 23, really young. All right, so we did a little longer deal. The shorter deal is more, their age. They're right in their prime. I think it's kind of, and I think you're seeing it across the league. It's a little
talking about Kenny Moore there, I believe.
Bit of a league trend. You're not seeing quite as long of deals as you did in the past. You're not seeing those 6-year contracts much we used to.
Yeah, because they sucked. and players would end up like holding out because they thought they were underpaid. So it's good the way things are compressing. Players have been complaining about wanting guaranteed contracts forever. Owners will say, and understandably so, well, look, we can't give you a 6-year guaranteed contract when like half these days, like you can't expect most players to make it past 2 or 3 more years at any given point. That you're gonna shrink that down, give him more guaranteed money, fine. But like the Texans have done with Laramie Tunsil, hey, he's only going to extend for a couple years. He's still going to be hungry to get that next big payday because the cap's going to keep increasing. And it's the best for both worlds. It makes the most sense. Doesn't hamstring the team if there is an injury.
Where do you see the prime kind of typically ending for a player age-wise?
Oh, that's a little luck.
Hold on a second.
I always tell guys.
Dead Shred, you just got here. Because this is what I do, man. I'm hanging out on the weekend, and I'm like, well, I'm going to watch Chris Ballard's press conference anyway. I might as well watch it with my online friends, okay? I just don't want to be lonely watching Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen. Also, Ballard has done a really good job putting together a solid team. He's just had a hell of a time finding the right quarterback. So I really like he generally teaches me something every couple times I watch him. I'm curious to see how Shane Steichen is approaching this offseason as well. And also, Dead Shred, I don't know if you've been paying attention to draft coverage or not. We don't have a damn first round pick, okay? So I guess I've got to find ways to get interested in the first round. Damn it!
As you play 4 years in a league, that's a hell of a career. I mean, social media and that brainiac of a world will criticize a guy for that, but like this is the elite of the elite, and it is hard to have a long career. It is. It's just hard. It's a hard game. It's hard on your body, and when you need a little luck, you got to have some freak physical traits. There's some guys that are just freak physical. Like I'll never forget in Chicago when we signed Julius Peppers, and everybody criticizes at 30, and at 38, he still looked good. And I think Buck's got a little of that in him. Like where Buck's you stood next to him. I mean, God gifted him a little bit different. So Buck's probably going to be able to play as long as physically he wants to play. So I think it's a different case of what they have physically in their body to get a little luck with the injuries. I mean, I think every case is a little bit different.
A year ago at this time, you weren't positive yet who your quarterback would be. Now, obviously, that who you understand that player. Does that change anything about the type of players you get around him on offense, or maybe the urgency to get certain positions?
Okay, so he's talking about
if
Anthony Richardson's going to be back. I think he gives an update about his shoulder here at some point. It's a good question. I'd be curious about y'all's input on that too. Is there for a mobile quarterback, like a devastatingly mobile quarterback, is there who do you want around him that might be different than otherwise? Like other than Ballard's just hardwired genetically to want to seek offensive linemen. I feel like when you've got a guy like Anthony Richardson, kind of like it was with Cam Newton, those guys make the offensive line better because the run threat takes defensive linemen and linebackers and puts them on their heels a little bit sometimes when they know that there's a quarterback who's a run threat. It adds an extra gap in the run game that you have to defend. So, but I don't know about drafting specifically different types.
To get certain positions as much. It is a good feeling knowing that we like him. We like what we saw and where we're going with him. Like I said, one, protect. Block and protect. It's one of the most, you just look through the league, you just look through the playoff teams. I mean, they all can block and protect. So I think that's critical. I think that's one. I remember Andrew.
Okay, so far, I was just trying to keep tabulated the lessons I've learned from Ballard today, or at least the interesting talking points, in case Sean wants to hear about this. So time and money are the big things you have to be concerned about, especially with first-round draft picks. How are they going to handle all this newfound time they have? How are they going to handle all the money? And the money's less of a concern because most of the first-round picks also have a big wad of NIL already, so they've demonstrated whether or not they can handle it. And then as far as the time goes, I think that, again, I'll go back to some of the things that have changed in society over the past 20 years. I honestly think, how do I say this? I think as marijuana has become more the drug of choice than alcohol for a lot of young athletes, that I don't know if that's really the best thing for them as athletes necessarily, but I think it's the best thing for perhaps keeping them out of the worst kind of trouble when it comes
Used to
to
tell me all the
all of the things that alcohol can lead to versus all the things that pot can lead to.
time, Chris, just make sure let's get me protected. I'll get the ball to get me guys that'll catch it and get to the right spot, and I'll make the rest work. Most of the really good ones, that's how they kind of roll. Of course, they want, do you want the superstar out there? Absolutely. But protection to me is always first and foremost.
And then protection, as he's talking about that. Oh, sorry, Dead Shred, by the way, just to catch up on Dead Shred. Where are you? Yeah, sorry, Dead Shred. I didn't mean to make you feel bad. You're just, we're just watching it just for the hell of it. I didn't mean to make you feel bad, man. I will warn you, I've been drinking IPAs, and I always forget until like my third IPA that's like I might as well be doing a Boilermaker with each one of these.
A bunch of cap space with Bucks extension. How do you see the cap? Why did you structure it that way?
Just to make Twitter go nuts.
One thing about Ballard though too is he, in any given press conference, he'll mention what the press has said, and he'll either criticize it or make them aware that he's aware of it, or he'll just flat out, reject some of it. I personally think he spends too much time listening to what's out there. I like my GMs and my head coaches to be in a silo, barely aware of the outside world. I think Ballard hears a little too much of it. Although I do think that he might listen to Sports Radio 610 when he's home in Texas City visiting relatives. I've heard. So I don't know if that's true or not.
Think I'm kidding? I'm not. Just want to see the reaction.
Chris, how does
Nothing beyond Twitter? Nothing beyond Twitter?
That's my answer. Yeah.
I think they were asking if he's on Twitter, and he said, yeah. So I don't know if we know what his handle is for his burner or not. You guys asked. I'm drinking Southern Tier Brewing Company. It's out of Western New York, close to my wife's hometown. It's brewed and bottled by Southern Tier Brewing Company in Lakewood, New York. I think that's on Chautauqua Lake. It's not a finger lake. It's just its own independent lake. Doesn't need any damn fingers.
Yeah, it gives us flexibility. Yes. Yes. Yes, it gives us flexibility. No, I know. It just gives us flexibility. Yes.
Chris, having a year with Shane now, and kind of seeing that like proof of concept of what he wants out of his players, how does that impact the draft evaluation process with him?
Oh, it's really
You
good.
say the perfect concept of what he wants out of his players with Shane Steichen? Was that the perfect concept last year? I seem to recall them not making the playoffs. I don't know.
Because it makes it, like when you go in there and you start looking at players together, and then when he starts looking at the board and okay, this is how I use this guy, this is how he fits. And from a GM perspective, that's a beautiful thing now, knowing that he's got a vision quickly for the player. And it's not a vision of negativity with many guys where he sees the strengths really quickly and will figure out a role for how this guy can play for you.
And just
that's
honestly, as much fun as it is to hate on your opponents and what have you, like Shane Steichen, if you think about Justin Herbert when he was at his most promising, Jalen Hurts when he was at his most promising, Gardner Minshew maybe perhaps. Like I haven't gone and looked at Gardner Minshew's stats last year compared to previous years or what have you, but that was a pretty good version of Gardner Minshew last year. And I do think that Steichen and his ability to work the RPO, which was really an issue for the Texans. The Texans linebackers were kind of put into a blender versus the Colts twice last year. And I think you're going to see the best version out of Anthony Richardson. Now, Anthony Richardson's consistency as a passer and his ability to stay healthy are really still huge question marks. So I look at this Colts team. They've got a hell of a roster. They've got a very talented young quarterback, but who still has a lot of question marks left to be answered. I think Shane Steichen is the guy, though. Like they hired the right guy to figure out exactly what you can get out of Anthony
That's
Richardson.
fun. That makes it fun.
How many, if you want to share first round grades, do you have?
Oh God, I just left the freaking room too. Why don't y'all come on in? I'll let y'all look at it. I want to say we had 19 to 21 right in that area.
Okay, that's interesting. You know what, boy, I didn't expect to get an honest answer out of that. So he's asked, how many first round grades do you have on these guys? So this is Chris Ballard, GM of the Colts. I think that's one thing. It's a little confusing. Obviously, 32 people are going to get drafted in the first round. But in terms of guys who have first round grades, like, okay, yeah, in any draft, these guys are going to go in the first round in any year. Usually it's somewhere between like 15 to 25. I've heard some other people say this year it's probably like around 17 or 18. So if he thinks it's 19 to 21 or what have you, it makes it interesting in this draft where there's so many offensive tackles that are really, really good. There's so many quarterbacks, most of whom will definitely suck. We don't know which ones, but most of whom will suck, but they're going to get drafted high. And then obviously there's a lot of good wide receivers. I think it makes it a little trickier if you're a team like the Texans, obviously, that doesn't need an offensive tackle, doesn't need a wide receiver right this moment. But the kind of things that could have fallen to them at 23 perhaps might have been really interesting. So I don't think they're gonna. If I had to bet right now, I wouldn't bet on the Texans trading back up into the first round. But I think there's some very potentially interesting scenarios that might tempt Nick to do that. And the Colts are sitting right at 15. So Ballard has never traded up in the first round. He's traded back a whole bunch. And this would probably be a year where like they're fine at offensive tackle. They could use a cornerback, they could use a wide receiver, but I think 15 or later is probably still going to be a really good spot to get one of those guys.
You mentioned Whiteout back at the combine. Anything else stand out to you depth-wise after you?
It's pretty good. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a few positions that's got some real depth. Like the O-line in this draft is really it's excellent. You know, there's depth throughout. I mean, I truly believe you're going to get a really good player in those mid rounds and even some later because of the depth of the group. And wideout's very similar. It is an excellent, those two position groups stand out. They're both really good.
And so from the Texans perspective, and again, you guys see what I like Ballard. Like Ballard probably gives up more information than most GMs would. And like, I don't think that's flack or anything. When it comes to talking about generalities, he's pretty open about stuff. I think that's when he states it that way. Look, there's O-line throughout. The offensive tackles are the ones who are jam-packed up at the top. So for the Texans who could use interior offensive line competition for sure, being in the second round is a pretty good place to be. Wide receivers, if you're thinking about a wide receiver for the future, pretty good place to be in the second round. Cornerback is the one where, all right, if they were going to really go out and try to find a young stud opposite Derek Stingley, cornerbacks, physically gifted cornerbacks, you got a lot better shot in the first round. But I think as of right now, I don't know if they're just totally comfortable rolling the dice on Henderson Okudah, but that might be the case.
Stuck out to you about your board this year, whether it's like bigger than normal because of the players that are around longer or even smaller?
I'll say this. I do think you're going to see a lot of offensive players taken early, in the first round. And I'm not saying it's a weak defensive draft, but it is a really strong offensive draft, especially at the top of it.
And Chris, has your draft philosophy or your evaluation philosophy changed or evolved in the last 7-8 years?
Yeah, I think I'm growing. I mean,
for those of you just joining us, because I saw one of you call him Colts. This is Chris Ballard, GM of the Indianapolis Colts, longtime GM of the Colts, also a Texas City native.
Longer you do this, I mean, even scouting or longer you do, you hope you can grow and figure out, who are the ones that, I mean, you're always looking for unique talent, unique traits in a player. But then also on the flip side of that, making sure that the character's always been very important with us without question. But making sure that we're drafting not only the unique traits, but also some substance with it, with the tape. Now we've always been pretty consistent with that, but I mean, there's times you'll take a chance, and then I know where you're getting at because we're going to trade back, and I can already see the article.
See, I
mean,
oh, wait a minute.
To that point, you have always.
See, I told you guys. He mentions the coverage. He always mentions the coverage. I think as far as him saying, you want to be sure that you back up the traits with substance. I think the biggest example in recent history that I can think of in terms of drafting traits more so than the actual tape is Trayvon Walker with the Jaguars. They drafted Trayvon Walker where he hadn't really shown anything on tape that looked like it was going to transfer directly to being a great edge rusher. It's just that he had these freakish athletic traits and qualities that were hard to ignore. And and if you're looking for an edge rusher who's going to end up being a freak, they almost always have to have. There's very few outliers, guys who aren't also physical freaks. There's very few guys that just get by without. There's fewer defensive ends, edge rushers probably who are awesome edge rushers than there are there's fewer edge rushers who are awesome who don't have elite physical traits than there are maybe wide receivers who are awesome despite not having elite physical traits. There's just not as much you can make up with route running or hands or anything like that. So it's I can see where the Jaguars were going. I just disagreed with it at the time.
Stress the value of picks and have look for ways to get more picks. Is your roster at a different place? Where I don't know how many roster spots there are.
Yeah, that's a good point. History. I mean, I just go off history, and the more picks you have, the better chance you have to hit. Now, of course, you're not going to hit on all of them, but it gives you more of a chance to hit. Look, we've moved up. We moved up for Jonathan Taylor. When we see one that's in striking distance that we think we can go get, we'll do it. But it's got to work out. And then you got to have two that want to make. You got to have somebody that wants to make the trade.
It's always most expensive to do that in the first round, obviously.
As far as trading back too, that's all the analytical studies and everything will show that in general, most teams, personnel people or GMs value their own opinion way more than they should. And that's when people get aggressive moving up. The Texans really valued their opinion more than logic would suggest with Will Anderson, but they might have been right in that moment. And that's the thing. That's the thing that always gets you, is that there's moments and examples where people are right. And then you want to believe that you're going to be that person that's right. In general, trading back more often than trading up makes a lot of sense. People tend to, they get irrationally confident or they get irrationally exuberant. And if you can pounce on that and trade for a next year's pick or, trade back for 2 picks or what have you, especially on draft day when people get really itchy, then more times than not, you're going to be right.
You see yourself actually considering a move up in the first?
Well, I just said probably move back. I don't know. I think it would depend. There would have to get somebody within striking distance that we felt really was unique and a difference maker for us. Yeah.
Just gotten an update handed to me by my assistant wife that the Astros are on at 3:05 when I was under the impression that they were on early evening. So we'll watch Shane Steichen, but it's going to be quick.
Is Drew Ogletree back with you guys?
Yes, he is. He's back. Correct.
So Drew Ogletree, is it Ogletree? What is it? I was looking at the Jaguars depth chart. Tight end. Yeah, Drew Ogletree, a tight end who had some kind of a domestic violence issue, but the charges were dismissed. I saw people in Indianapolis openly excited that Ogletree is coming back. So I'm guessing, I have zero clue about what the domestic issue was, but it sounds like maybe there's nobody feigning being kind of careful about it or anything, at least. So must have been no big deal. I don't know. But they're kind of, you look at Jelani Woods, that Granson fella, Mo Alley Cox, who went off against the Texans early on, this Drew Oglethorpe type. I'd be surprised that they draft a tight end. They're kind of loaded there.
We haven't talked yet about Charlie Partridge. He's got a long history of developing some big name guys. What can you tell us about him?
Excited about Charlie. Been watching it. He was at Wisconsin years ago. It's where I didn't get to know him well, but I know Coach Alvarez spoke just glowingly about him as a teacher and as a coach. And
Hold on a second. I don't know who they're talking about.
We haven't talked yet about Charlie Partridge. He's got a long history of developing some big name guys. What can you tell us about him?
excited about Charlie. Been watching it. He was at Wisconsin years ago. It's where I didn't get to know him well, but I know Coach Alvarez spoke just glowingly about him as a teacher.
Charlie Partridge, defensive line coach. It's a Gus Bradley defense, which, like classic Gus Bradley, get a whole boatload of pass rush up front. He doesn't want to have to blitz more than he needs to, allow you to play conservatively on the back end, but like selectively blitz. But the D-line coach and the defensive line in general is going to be very important there. It was a mixed bag of results for the Colts last year where they had a boatload of sacks, but not necessarily a whole lot of QB pressures. And it was almost like a game-by-game scenario where there's a lot of potential there without having a megastar pass rusher. They did it by committee and set an Indianapolis Colts franchise record with 51 sacks. So not a Baltimore and Indianapolis Colts, but the Indianapolis era of the Colts.
Teacher and as a coach.
Which to me still feels like it can't possibly have been more than like 10 years, right?
And
I can't possibly be old enough that happened when I was a child.
actually, a few years ago, we actually reached out to him, and he's very principle-centered man. Like, he wasn't leaving Pittsburgh. He had given their commitment, which in today's world is very unique. And I admire. But you just look at his history of developing players and his ability to make them better. I mean, and I'm not talking about like average ones either. I'm talking about unique, from J.J. Watt to kids that Hendrickson that's playing in Cincinnati. I mean, this guy's coached some really good players, and they all tell you he's one of the best ones they've had. So
hey, Chris, I got to tell you something. According to J.J. Watt himself, J.J. sucked his rookie year. So, your fancy little defensive line coach didn't do much for J.J. by my estimation.
Excited to get him. He's been great to work with and fun to work with, and got a great eye for it. So it'll be fun to get him. I know it's the first week with the guys with him. And coaching's coaching in my mind. Like high school, college. I mean, there's good coaches at every level. Like it doesn't matter where level you're at. You can do it at any level. There's high school coaches, I promise you, that will come into our league and be perfectly damn good football coaches, man.
Fuck yeah. Oh, dude, thank you. I'm sorry, everybody. He's from Texas City, okay? I like Chris Ballard. I can't help it. Like, he just says a lot of things that make a lot of sense. And he speaks way more openly than most GMs about. I hope he fails, don't get me wrong. But he says a lot of things that make a lot of sense. As far as high school coaches that could step into the NFL, my God, yes. Because there's some bad position coaches out there. There's some bad position coaches in the NFL who either had a buddy or maybe they're really good with the X's and O's, but they don't know a damn thing about what position they're coaching. Guys will get moved. Think about this. This happens on the NFL level. I mean, guys will get their first job coaching a position will be in the NFL. You're not, by definition, there's no chance in hell that you're that good at coaching tight ends if you've never coached tight ends before, and all of a sudden you're put there. There's a boatload of high school and college coaches who are better at it than you, and it's frustrating as a player sometimes because you see really good, talented young players who have a position coach that can really do nothing for that guy, and it frustrates the hell out of me. So, like when Ballard says that, yeah, I think it's one of the most untapped areas for improvement on NFL teams is getting rid of some of the squids that they have at some of the positions.
One quick follow-up on Ogletree, without getting into detail. I mean, are you comfortable with what you learned there?
Yes.
And you can move forward?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely comfortable with it.
That was it. Okay, so let's go now to Mr. Shane Steichen. Shane Steichen, I don't know about as much or like as much as Chris Ballard, so it's easier for me to give him the old college hate. Let's see. Stop that screen. You guys will notice that I have yet to get a producer like I promised, because I'm kind of thinking I kind of like doing the Ed Sheeran thing. I think I just it's going to be me up here with my 808, and there we go. Let's see. I'm not quite at Ed Sheeran level yet, but I'm getting there. Shane Steichen, ladies and gentlemen.
Everybody fired up to be back with the players in the building. Obviously, an exciting time in the city. The Pacers making the playoffs. Congrats to them, Coach Carlisle, his staff. What they've done to put themselves in position to make the playoffs is awesome. We're going to be fired up, cheering for them. Caitlin Clark getting drafted here is going to be awesome. So, really exciting time for the city. Look forward to the future.
You disgust me, city of Indianapolis. You made a mockery of Caitlin Clark's introductory press conference because your most venerable, your most respected, your most popular sports writer, Greg Doyle, decided to get all creepy. Way to go, Indy.
Future. So ready when you guys are.
Shane, how much more prepared are you year two than year one? I mean, coming in today on all this.
Yeah, no, definitely more prepared. Been through it once, now going through it for a second time. Obviously, there's still things that'll come up that'll be new. Every year is a new year, but definitely more prepared this year for sure.
I think he cried at his press conference last year. A lot of people would say that's classless to make fun of a crying man.
The standard that was set last year, and that has to be reset.
The mistake would be thinking that I care if you think I'm classless.
Does that start today?
Yeah, it started yesterday in our team meeting, just talking about the culture again and what we're all about, and the character, the preparation, consistency, and being relentless. And team rules. I got 2 team rules: be on time and treat people with respect, and that's what we're about.
This guy, he's the too persnickety. D'Amico's only got 1 team rule. What was it? Casario said it the other day. It was, I don't think it was, it was protect the team. There you go. The whole having 1 or 2 team rules, I'm a fan of that, but it obviously in reality, it never works out that way. But I do think that sometimes football coaches end up coaching to the lowest common denominator. They're screaming at the team when in reality, they're screaming at 1 or 2 dudes that can't get their shit right. I think when you coach to the better majority of the team, by having 1 rule, be on time and show respect, you can pull the jackasses aside and explain to them what respect means exactly, but keeping it simple is better. I played for a guy in Tom Coughlin who had about 473 rules, and each one of those were had sub rules. It was a lot.
And told the guys yesterday, determination never rests, and that's what we're about, and it starts right now.
That's a short list of rules.
That's it. You don't want to have too many rules, right? It's pretty simple, right? Be on time. Time's valuable in this league. It's valuable in life, and time's valuable. So make sure you're on time. Don't be late to things, and then treat people with respect, which goes back to character.
Treat people with respect is a little tricky because, defensive backs cutting up on each other is one of my favorite things in this world. So hopefully he doesn't try to, Steichen's not going to walk into the DB room and be like, "Hey, fellas, could you stop it around with a tomfoolery like this, please? You need to show each other respect."
Success or some success in your first year as a head coach, how much does it propel you? Well, how much does it help you to have credibility in the room when you come back to year 2 and that kind of thing? You don't have to reassert that.
Yeah, I think you got to earn the respect every day and every year, from your peers. Nothing in this league is given to you, and you got to go out and earn it every single day. And you guys heard me say this before, but every day is a job interview, and you got to attack it that way and be determined in everything you do, from off-season program, the weight room, the training room, meeting rooms, going on that practice field, and getting better is the main goal.
Yeah, the biggest thing too, sometimes, Shane Steichen, I look at him and he's got kind of a Nick Foles vibe to him. And I just wonder sometimes whether he's enough of grab life by the balls and make it do what you will type of dude. And yet ultimately in the NFL, just like it was with Tony Dungy, if players respect you and if as a football mind, and if they think that you're going to take them in the right direction, it's generally all you need. You know, like you can be the prototype, or you can be a guy that's a little bit more like introverted or what have you. And it works as long as guys respect you as a football person.
You're having so few new faces.
I do.
I mean, ideally, you've got a guy like D'Amico who does both, but whatever. Not everybody can be D'Amico.
Huge. You know, you guys heard me talk about it a while back, but the continuity, you know, getting those guys back, you know, congrats to all those guys we got back. It was awesome to get those guys back because they're really good players. And the continuity and the relationships you build with players in this league, you know, sometimes it's hard. You get a lot of turnover, you know, year in and year out, and to have a lot of our guys back is huge. You know, the relationships that we built with those guys are going to continue to get stronger throughout this season, this off season, and into the future. So fired up about that.
You know what's crazy? I just thinking about this is I've been just reading up on the Colts before I did this and listening to both these guys. The Colts, as far as I can tell, have not received a whole bunch of criticism for being relatively quiet in the offseason. I mean, they didn't add a starter to their offense or defense through free agency. They re-signed a few guys, extended some guys, but they're a team that didn't make the playoffs, didn't do a whole lot. One of the biggest changes is going to be that they just get Anthony Richardson back. And I think overall they've got a pretty good roster. But you compare that to the Cowboys, who also did very, very, very little in the offseason, were a much better team last year and would probably then project to be a better team this year than the Colts. That's all up in the air, obviously, are just getting lambasted. Not that I'm trying to protect the poor Cowboys or anything, but I think it does go to show you. I think like I look at the Cowboys roster and they still have a hell of a roster. I look at the Colts roster and I think they got a hell of a roster. They just got a big question mark at quarterback. And I think that's where I'm like trying to rethink exactly how I feel about the Cowboys, because it's fun to pile on and everything. But that was a team that was very, very close to being a genuinely solid team. But you saw them falter late in the fourth quarters of games, and you could see where defensively they weren't quite as good as the statistics suggested. And I almost wonder just how much like Mike Zimmer might end up being the most important hire of the year. If the Cowboys do almost nothing in free agency, but then end up actually showing up in the playoffs next year, I think a big part of it's going to be that Mike Zimmer turned that into a genuinely good defense. This is a Colts and Cowboys podcast from now on.
You didn't have a lot of that on the field, John Taylor, Anthony Richardson last year, but how much do you think just having that runway this year, having both in the building right now and working toward the
it's huge. It's huge. You guys have heard me, the excitement I got about, you know, those two guys along with the rest of our football team, but to get those guys reps in the offseason program and going into training camp and getting the feel for each other in the backfield is going to be critical to our success moving forward.
What have you learned about DeForest Buckner and maybe his work habits that you've seen over the last year?
Yeah, I can't say enough good things about him. I mean, he's the definition of a pro, is what he is. Everything he does with a sense of purpose. He does it with urgency. The way he takes care of his body, the way he performs, you know, week in and week out, not only in the meeting rooms on the practice field.
Sorry, for those of you that might not know, this is Shane Steichen, head coach of the Colts. Asked a question about DeForest Buckner, the defensive tackle.
But on game days, is obviously he shows up and makes a ton of plays. So to get him back secured for the next couple of years is huge for our franchise.
DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart are one of the better defensive tackle tandems in the league. And I really like Grover Stewart. Grover Stewart, if any of you know Tavondre Sweat, please tell them to just look at the saga of Grover Stewart, because Grover Stewart showed up at the combine out of Albany State weighing 345 pounds. He was way too big for a defensive lineman to move effectively. So he got down to 315, and now he's honestly one of the more underrated defensive tackles in the league. And I think Tavondre Sweat is in that same boat. He doesn't have to get down to 315, but he needs to get down from 365. He's just too big. He's too big. And I want him. You can tell he's worked at his technique. You can tell he gives a damn. He needs to learn that he's just too big. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he'll be 365 and he'll be just fine, but I'll be surprised.
Is he underrated?
Is DeForest Buckner underrated? That's a dumb question. That's a dumb question.
Years is huge for our franchise.
Is he underrated?
I don't think so. I think he's one of the best in the league and probably one of the best to ever do it when it's all said and done.
Yeah.
Anytime leaders like Buck and Zaire Franklin, does that set an example for the rest of the locker room?
Yeah, it's huge. Like I said, to have those guys coming back, two huge leaders on our football team is big, especially in the locker room, having that voice, those veteran leaders, that voice in the locker room, those young guys see the work habits that those guys have, and you kind of piggyback off those guys. You get a young guy that comes in, that we draft, and you see those veteran leaders and why they've been playing so long, why they've been playing at a high level, because they do things the right way, and then obviously they make plays on Sunday.
Like DeForest Buckner's been to 4 Pro Bowls. He was first team All-Pro in 2020. There's a lot of good defensive tackles out there. He's one of the best. This is a golden era of defensive tackles. These guys are freaks. It blows my mind like how many freakishly gifted defensive tackles there are. And DeForest Buckner is in that same group as all of them.
Sunday.
What have been your discussions with AR on where he is and your plan moving forward the next few weeks?
Yeah, it's a good question. He's in a really good spot. Had really good discussions that I'll obviously keep private, but he's in a really good spot. Shoulder's feeling good. Should be good to go for practices like we talked about earlier. He'll be out there throwing, but we'll limit, we'll obviously monitor it, make sure we're smart with that, but he's in a really good place.
So the biggest thing about Anthony Richardson that's important is that he's been hurt a lot. And I'm not trying to bag on him or anything, but this is his 3rd major shoulder injury since high school. And that's no small thing for a quarterback. I don't care how awesome your legs are and how good you are with that. Like if you've got a tendency to get your shoulder injured, and if one of the problems might be that you're not afraid of contact as much as you should be, that's going to be an issue.
You're holding back.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have to hold him back?
Even at 25.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, he's a competitor. I mean, I think most guys that are competitors that want to be great are going to want to push themselves. But again, we're just going to have to monitor it, and we'll go from there.
What's the significance for him of maybe this stretch that he didn't get last year, the meetings and just some of the
yeah, it's big. It's not new for him, right? He's heard the terminology, going through those meetings right now, just going through it and quizzing, and he's all over it. So we've got a good foundation going into this offseason and going into the season. So it's been good.
I know they limit what kind of contact you can have with players before you get to this, and you can talk to them, but not about football.
Right.
I'm sure your wheels have been turning though all these months. Was this kind of a long time coming for you to be able to get your hands back on them and have those discussions?
Yeah, it's awesome. There's just not only just him, but all the guys, right? I mean, just to get back in the building, the off-season program is huge, and to get in there and talk football, with these guys again, and you start from the ground up every year. We're talking about how to get in a huddle. As simple as that may sound, right? It's like, oh shoot, remember that you line up here and the tight end's over here. I mean, it's simple stuff, right? But shoot, it's been a little bit of time, and you go through those little things, and because sometimes you get, especially when the draft comes, you get the rookies, and it's like, here's the huddle, here's the formation. So you go through that stuff again, just reminders more than anything, and then you really start to dive into the details of the systems.
I think I told you guys this story once before, maybe not, but when I was a rookie, when I was in college, we held hands on the defensive line in the huddle, like as we looked at the linebacker. It seemed natural at the time. It feels weird now that I'm saying it out loud. But so my rookie year, I got into the huddle, and the huddle was basically the same format. And I just, without even thinking about it, I grabbed the 2 older vets next to me, one hand on the left and one hand on the right. This is a less politically correct time. I was called a few choice things, and then I never held anybody's hand again.
With all you guys
It's devastating.
are expecting from AR and Taylor, it's easy to forget that they didn't do much at all last year.
Right.
Off season and training camp and all. What did they miss, and what will they benefit?
Hey, hold on a second here, Omar. This is yeah. I don't know. I will openly call out any stupid questions in Houston media, including my own.
From being on the field together.
I think the communication part is huge, right? Just them being in the backfield together, communicating that way, the ball handling aspect of it is big. I mean, obviously that's part of their deal, right? They're going to have a lot of ball handling stuff that we got to get wired up with those 2 guys in the backfield, whether it's handing the ball off or, zone replay, whatever it may be, but going through that process, throwing to them out of the backfield, all those different things. So that part's going to be huge, this offseason and training camp going into the season.
How do you feel about just having the offensive line, the continuity there as well to come back? Obviously,
Yeah,
have some guys who play at a high level.
it's big. It's huge to have all those guys. I mean, to have the same guys coming back.
Oh, he's boring me.
Is big, and obviously they played at a high level. Credit to those guys. Credit to Tony and Chris Watt for coaching them. But got a lot of faith in those guys. We got some good leaders up there, good veteran presence, and they're only going to continue to get better.
All right, I've had enough of him. I got to address Omar here for a minute. Not because I don't like you, Omar, but it does bring up something. Brings up something I forgot about. So Omar, I hold Sean's hand all the time. I told him once about the study I read where staring into somebody's eyes for 10 seconds creates like this oxytocin surge that allows you to trust the other person longer. And he doesn't go for it. He's not ready for that. He can't handle it yet. But as far as the old that would never happen in Houston media. Nope, never. This is you got to be watch out for this, because this is kind of like if I say oh, that team, your cornerback sucks, and then they say, well, you guys, your cornerback sucks, and I might be like, well, yeah, what? What does that have to do? How does that have anything to do with your cornerback? If you can't criticize people while also understanding that you might suffer from the same thing, then what is the point in even pointing fingers? My God, Omar, if you're going to be petty along with me here, you're going to have to get on board, man. All right? You have to detach yourself somewhat from self-awareness if you want to be on the Payne train. Let's see. You definitely sound like a hand holder. Screw it up. There's no eye contact. Not a lot of questions, just a whole lot of stuff about the jerseys. This is what I think about the jerseys stuff, or the new uniform stuff, and then I'm off to watch the Astros. I don't care. I think that largely, whether they're ugly or beautiful, what you do in those uniforms is what will matter. And if if a rose by any other name, whatever, all that stuff. If the Texans win a championship wearing some font on the helmet that you don't like, I guarantee you're going to like that font eventually. You'll end up having a tattoo, or your wedding invitation will be in that Gothic font, and everything will be awesome. So I part of this is just me being like, I don't just generally care about stuff like that. I totally get those of you who really do care about it. And I just I'm just glad that on Tuesday they'll unveil it for sure. I'll be at the party on Tuesday night. Apparently they are giving away real tattoos, like free real tattoos that you can sign up for. I don't know how big they are or anything, but that's pretty cool. I don't know how I can get you guys tickets or anything, as I've seen a few of you ask about. I don't have a clue about that. Why does Ballard look like that orc from Lord of the Rings? I've never watched Lord of the Rings. Thank you, baby Jesus, for sending D'Amico back to Houston. Yes. Ballard looks like, I don't know. From what I hear, they have to be Texans tattoos. Yeah, I think they've only there's a few specific tattoos that you can get. So, and I know if I got chippy with any of you, it was all done with love and too many IPAs. Go Stros. I didn't watch the ninth inning last night. I'm told that it got interesting for Hader. It's going to be fine. Verlander's back. Verlander's going to lead the chart. The level of intensity and all of that will just fall in line behind that, and everything's just going to be fine. Okay? Awesome. Thanks, everybody, for joining me on a Saturday afternoon, watching a couple of yahoos from the Indianapolis Colts. It was good stuff.